as I'm garnering more respect in the research community, I'm learning that people that are smart in this industry and true researchers and true scientists, there's no absolutes. It's always a matter of just, we think that, or possibly this, or I don't know, but maybe.
Fighting out of Sacramento, California!
Woo! What's it gonna do?
Better. Stronger.
Son of a bitch.
Faster.
Oh, yeah!
I was listening to his most recent video. I was like, how does this guy, where does he do his research? Where does he block this out? Like, how much prepping does he do? How much production? I can't believe he's just going on to in front of a camera and just winging it. I can't, if that's all him winging it, wow, really good. Oh, there he is, right there.
What's up, man? Sorry about that, guys.
Hey. We were just here talking about how good you are at handing out information.
Master communicator.
Nice.
So we just wanted to get you on here and sort of get some of your thoughts on, you know, a lot of this stuff. First of all, you have a huge audience, right? Your main focus is intermittent fasting. Just tell us a little bit about like how you got into this and like why you started doing this, because your channel is just really well produced and really well done.
Yeah, I mean, for me, intermittent fasting was something that worked really well for me personally, right? And I think in the world of content, if there's not a sincere passion for something, you really shouldn't be creating content about it. And you can have a passion for something or an interest in something, and that's one thing. But like if you're just creating content for content's sake, that's a whole different world. So, I created my channel with a very, very almost politely dogmatic view towards intermittent fasting because it was the one thing that worked for me. Like, and it's that way for a lot of people.
I did that with carnivore, to be honest. I was like, thought everybody should do it,
Yeah. And, I think that in the beginning, I think it's a natural evolution. I don't think that you can come out of like success with something without like really taking a naturally objective like looks at it. Like it's very difficult to be like, this was the only thing that worked for me. So let me just immediately say, oh, but there's a million options for people. Like it's a natural evolution. So for me over the last few years, that's kind of been my evolution. Be like, this worked for me, but it's the more you learn, the less you know.
Yeah.
And as I have developed a platform that gives me a powerful voice, I have to make sure that there's a lot of like very nuancy things that go on there. And as I'm garnering more respect in the research community, I'm learning that people that are smart in this industry and true researchers and true scientists, there's no absolutes. It's always a matter of just, we think that, or possibly this, or I don't know, but maybe, and that's actually, people get such a warped mentality with content where they think it needs to be absolute. And I've actually talked to your brother about this specifically. It's like, it's so nice to be able to actually spur conversation above all else. It's really nice to just propose hypothesis, and people can know where your biases stand. That's totally fine, but you position it in a way that's interesting for people to discuss and try for themselves. So, I lost 110 pounds with intermittent fasting and keto, and I built my platform predominantly on that, but I have an amazing platform that I can now educate to have the same kind of evolution that I've had.
Yeah, it must be really hard because you're in this world of like YouTube and the internet of like you have a huge channel, like a couple million followers, I think, right? What do you got?
3.2, but who's counting?
3.2, but who's counting, right? Yeah, so 3.2 million followers, and you got to constantly try to like deliver information that is like both concise and correct, and also has some sort of like almost like a gimmick to it, right? Like, because it's like nuance doesn't sell, so it's really hard to get on YouTube and try to push something on something that's like not a little bit like, a little bit out there or something, or like maybe something different than they've heard, right? Like it's the nuance of these things is hard to really sell. And that's what with the post I was talking about that you posted about like the knee pain diet, it's like, that's like, boom, like, okay, I think that, like, boom, I see that and I'm going to try that. And I think that'll work. And like the nuance in there is that it absolutely would be very beneficial to somebody who's never been on that kind of diet, right? Like never fasted before, and that could actually help really resolve their knee pain. We've seen that with a carnivore diet. However, if you're looking at somebody like me who's like training all the time and like already kind of doing these things, where do you go from there? You know, and like those kind of nuances are really hard to play out in like a post or a video, you know?
Yeah, it's honestly it's why I live on YouTube versus Instagram, because in YouTube I can explain. And it's just like Instagram mechanic. I can't explain. I don't have time to explain. And if you do explain, there's no way you're getting eyeballs. So for the longest time, I didn't even post on Instagram. I goes with pictures of my dogs and pictures of my wife and kids. And then I'm like, you know what? Like Instagram's refusing to give me a blue check mark. They just won't. And it's like it's I'm like, and Instagram is how I reach out to get people on my channel.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need that blue check mark. So okay, and they're, like maybe I'll start trying to get some more. So I do more short form content, but I still try to keep it super nuanced so it doesn't get the attention that other people will get when they say that, rub apple cider vinegar on your earlobes and you're going to grow 6 inches or something. But like, it's it's super. So I mean, as Dr. Tommy Wood, who I had on my channel, super well respected researcher and also MD, PhD, MD, guys like credentialed up the ass, and he's like this nuts, awesome. He put it so simply. He's like, your channel is awesome. He's like, you come for the clickbait, stay for the nuanced discussion. And like, because the nice thing about YouTube is I can put a somewhat clickbaity thumbnail, somewhat clickbaity title to get their attention. And then I actually give them the real truth. And you know what? It's great because with Instagram, you can't really do that. If you're going to have a clickbaity title, you're going to have clickbaity content. But when I say clickbaity, that's an over exaggeration. Like my titles are not clickbaity, but they do get attention.
They're strategic. Like they're strategic. Like you're wording something in a specific way. So you're like, oh, they're going to think this maybe, but I'm going to give them this. And it's not necessarily like to trick anybody. It's just to make it more like dramatic, or more dynamic as far as, the post goes.
Yeah.
And I get all that. And I think that clickbait doesn't matter and your content is so well planned out. It's so well crafted. It's like Russell and I were just debating on how you actually do it. And maybe you could let us peek behind the curtain a little bit. But like, I mean, you have these monologues that just kind of go on forever. I don't know if you're memorizing these. I don't know if you have a teleprompter, but like it's delivered really well. So even if it is like a clickbait title, I think like people will leave the channel satisfied with like they got really good information.
It's definitely like a peek behind the curtain. I 100% promise, swear on my wife's life, swear on my kid's life, I do not use a teleprompter.
There we go. And I was like, he must use a teleprompter. The only time I've
ever incredible, man. Just so you know, you're incredible with your communication style. It's just elite. You're at the top with your communication style.
I really appreciate it. I mean, that is what I've learned over the years is that's my gift, right? That's what I'm good at. And so I can lean on that and understand that like I may not be a scientist. I may not be doing the research, but I do have something that other people don't have. So like I'm proud of that. I'm okay with that. And I feel like it's good for me to be, I don't need to be the expert. I can let other people be the experts because what I'm an expert at is delivering that information. So and that's perfectly fine with me. The only time I've ever used a teleprompter was like back in the days when I was filming ads with like six pack abs for like those were like 45-minute, what are called VSLs, video sales letters, where you're essentially like doing a 45-minute. Those were the only times I ever used a teleprompter because it's 45 minutes of pretty strategic, almost sales copy in those given. So that's not typical educational content. What I do, I've built a robust team of W-2 employees that all are actual legit employees that get benefits and have healthcare and have 401ks and have everything because I feel like building a team is good. Been the same team for the last 6 years now, with the exception of only lost one employee that still works for me as a contractor because she went on to get her dream job, working in Hollywood. But then I have a team from Glasgow and also from Oxford University. So we get lots of research. We get stuff that's cutting edge. And what we'll do is I'll come up with ideas. Like, we need to do this content. We'll get good research. And then when you really read a paper, when you read a scientific literature, you have hundreds of ideas that come to mind as you're reading that literature. You're like, oh, well, what about this? Okay, they isolated for this variable, but not this. Well, okay, oh, that would be a good topic. So you're writing it down. And then there's endless rabbit holes. Like, finding content is not difficult if you know how to read scientific literature. So then from there, what I'll do is kind of distill it down, be like, okay, well, how do I break this down? So that's where my team and I sit together, and we always do this together. We're like, how do we distill this stuff down? And then kind of give myself sort of the abstracts of these studies the night before I film. I film usually once or twice a week. The night before I film, I make sure I'm fluent in the research. And generally the stuff I'm talking about, I've been talking about for 6, 7 years. So I have a basic repository of the physiology in my brain already. So all I have to quote unquote memorize is the research, the newer research. So it's like I can always take that research and sort of triangulate it back to what I have in my brain from the last 7 years of what I've learned. Uh, but it comes right back to the passion thing. Like everything I talk about, I'm sincerely excited to talk about. And the only way, like, I sucked in school. Like I was not good at like testing. I was not good at memorization with that stuff. I couldn't just memorize and cram for a test. The only shit that I was good at was shit that I was actually interested in, which was happened to be science and it happened to be history. Like science and history, I loved. And I excelled in those because I sincerely loved it. And I feel like if you want to learn something and you want to be able to articulate it, if you sincerely love it, that doesn't come hard at all. That's just natural.
Well, we're going to test your knowledge here because Russell has a question. We were talking this weekend. So Russell has lost 60 pounds now,
60 pounds, yeah.
down from what to what?
508, 510
508, 510.
to
A lot of time
449 this morning.
to 449 this morning, right? And this
Yeah.
is in the past 8 months.
So it's been about a year and a half. There was
A year and a half,
a little
maybe.
bit of up and
So it's
downs
been
along
kind
the way.
of slow. It hasn't been like super fast, but it's been consistent, which Mark and I love. And
And my mobility, which I think is the most important part, maybe questionably first or second, my mobility skyrocketed. The amount of work volume I can do now compared to 18 months ago is 10 times more.
Mark and I feel like a lot of times people in Russell's category, that have a lot of weight to lose, over 100 pounds to lose, are often just forgotten about, and we don't hear much from that community. But Mark and I are really trying to help Russell. He's a really good friend of ours, and he had a question about insulin resistance that I just could kind of answer, but sloppy. So I'd like him to ask you if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I that's my question. I was listening to your most recent episode on your YouTube channel, and you brought up insulin resistance, and I was just wondering if you could go over like the causes and the symptoms, and how does it affect metabolic health?
Yeah. So, disclaimer on the front end of this is that insulin resistance is it a lot of times can be a canary in the coal mine for other things that are going on, right? So when we say causes of insulin resistance, I can certainly address potential causes there because they do exist, obviously.
Sure.
But there's a lot of other things going on now. Okay, first and foremost, goes without saying, obesity, being overweight, is a ridiculous risk factor for insulin resistance. So that in and of itself, but a risk factor isn't the same necessarily as a cause. It just means that we know that category has a much higher likelihood, right? I think I saw some statistic is like estimated by like 2030, it's like something like 70% of people are going to be insulin. It's just like the rate we're going right now. It's estimated about 40% are insulin resistant, not diabetic, but insulin. So a lot of people are insulin. In a very essential, like basic way of putting it, insulin resistance is caused when the pancreas, two different ways, right? Two different sides of it. When the pancreas is not receiving a proper signal and the pancreatic islet cells and beta cells are not producing insulin adequately for the amount of glucose that is in the system. Now, there's also the other side of the equation where you're producing insulin, but you're having issues on the periphery, right? Where your cells are not accepting glucose into the cell itself. And that has to do with what's called GLUT4 translocation, basically the receptor that catches glucose out of the bloodstream and pulls it into a cell. For whatever reason, is not receiving the signal from insulin, so it's not translocating to the membrane. Now, this can be caused by consistent exposure to high glucose. Okay, that's the most common thing that people talk about. And I liken it to like a white noise or a fan. Okay, if you have a fan turned on and that fan is on all the time, eventually you don't hear the fan anymore. But if you turn the fan off for a while and then turn it on, you'll hear the fan again. That's sort of like insulin resistance with glucose. If you're constantly bombarding your body with glucose, and it's not implying that people are gluttons and constantly bombarding their body. There's lots of reasons why this could happen. But colloquially putting it, if your glucose is circulating, high levels of circulating glucose, eventually the pancreas is just kind of like, and the cells are just sort of like, what? Oh, there's just that glucose again, just doing its thing. That is why, even though there's a lot of people in the scientific community that disagree with the fasting approach, there's a lot of people that do agree with it too. It's about 50-50 when they ask me, but that's why I'm such a big fan of like fasting, because it's just like nothing turns off that fan quicker. Like you're just turning off the fan. You're just turning off that intake. Like, so yeah, the evidence does suggest that pretty vast improvements in insulin sensitivity. Weight loss in general, caloric restriction in general, obviously will improve that as well. But I like fasting because, especially for my mentality, it's such an on-off switch. And for that fan analogy, it just makes sense. Now, on the contrary, the caveat here is this does not apply for people that are doing carnivore or like very low keto, because they end up in a different bucket. But for the bulk of Americans, having high amounts of saturated fat in conjunction with carbohydrates will also lead to this, right? And there's pretty solid evidence that like high saturated fat can impact insulin resistance through, it's serum palmitate, basically elevating palmitate, which is going to have the same effect. Well, looking at those two things, high glucose and high saturated fat, I'm going to guess that most people that are overweight and obese are not going out and overeating ribeye steaks. And I'm going to guess that they're probably not going out and overeating just pixie sticks. So my guess is that it's the combination of the fats and the carbs together in hypercaloric, like super high levels in large boluses with inactivity, right? And
You're saying pizza. You're saying pizza.
Precisely. I'd say that's the example I always use. It's like you have a relatively high glycemic carb with the bread, and then you have the saturated fat with the cheese and the meat. Independently, I don't think those things are that big of a deal. Like my wife makes I'm going off on a tangent, but like my wife makes the most amazing gluten-free sourdough bread. And I would be, first of all, an asshole if I didn't eat it, but B, I would also be lying if I didn't say that I don't enjoy the hell out of that stuff when she makes it, which is rare. But like kind of my rule with it, I'm just like, if you're going to make this pizza crust with sourdough, gluten-free, bread, let's not put a lot of cheese on it. Let's like keep it pretty lean. So like my side of the pizza usually has the sauce and maybe like some leaner chicken and stuff. It's kind of a boring pizza, but it's like, if I'm going to have carbs, I'm going to not combine it with a bunch of saturated fat too, because I feel like that just doesn't really occur in nature. Like like that's the kind of combination that just, again, this is theory. Okay. But like in the spirit of just thinking outside the box, like where do you have a combination of saturated fat and high sugar, like, or high refined starch coming in tandem? Like it just doesn't exist. Like you're either eating a bunch of fruit in nature or you're eating a bunch of like meat.
Yeah, I think it only exists really in breast milk and in acorns. So the reason like squirrels love acorns is they're almost like a donut. They're high in fat and they have carbs in them. So they store them up for the winter.
That's interesting.
It's interesting, right?
Have you ever come across anything that stated that your body fat percentage, as the more it increases, the more your baseline insulin just gets pumped into your system?
It's kind of, from what I've seen, that is like sort of the consistent chicken or the egg question. Now, so there's a lot of evidence that suggests that when you're insulin resistant, it can certainly lead to more body fat accumulation. But then there's so much evidence that suggests, probably even more evidence that suggests that the more adipose tissue you have, the more insulin resistant you are. There's not necessarily a baseline number per se, but what we do have to remember is that adipose tissue is like a master regulator of a lot of things. Like, just to give you context, like 10, 15 years ago, we thought that muscle was just there to move things, to move our skeletal system and to lift weights. And then we start seeing like, oh my gosh, there's myokines, there's exerkines, there's all these things that muscles secrete as an organ, right? Well, even more recently, we're discovering this with fat. Like we used to think fat is just fat. It's bad because it's extra weight and it's bad because of XYZ and whatever. And the only real distinction was visceral fat versus subcutaneous fat, and maybe a little distinction with brown fat. So with that, they're kind of like, yeah, okay, fat is bad. A little fat is okay, whatever. Now we're starting to see like, oh, well, okay, there's these adipokines. There's things that the fat actually secretes that act as messengers and literally act as like a hormone-like compound in our body that can signal all kinds of things. And one of the things that it potentially signals is more resistance to glucose and insulin resistance in the first place. So you could make the argument there that, okay, the more body fat that you have, the more adipokines and the more inflammatory sort of cytokines like IL-6 and things that are being secreted. There is very clear evidence, almost enough evidence to say we know that inflammation impacts insulin resistance significantly. And inflammation, if you think of it sort of as not white noise, in this case, it's more like static. Like think of it like dense fog. your pancreas is producing insulin trying to get to a cell, and there's it's like a car going over a bridge, and all of a sudden there's just a shitload of thick pea soup fog. And you guys in Sacramento know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So it's it's, and I'm in Carmel right now, so same deal.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
beautiful.
It's
I love that
you
beach.
can't like it just doesn't reach, right. The signal is disrupted, and when that fog gets lifted, the signal gets better. So generally speaking, they say that's a later stage issue with insulin resistance, because like, but again, no one really knows. So reduce the inflammation. That's one thing that I feel very confident saying that will improve insulin resistance. Best ways to reduce inflammation outside of losing weight are exercising, right? I mean, that's probably the best possible thing you can do. This is where I do get a little bit more on a high horse about fasting and keto, because the evidence, although there's been a slight regression to the mean in some of the research, the evidence is still pretty strong that the presence of ketone bodies are pretty anti-inflammatory. And actually, I shouldn't even say pretty, they're very anti-inflammatory, but it's somewhat pulsatile in nature. So we don't always, it's not chronically elevated. It's like the anti-inflammatory effects of beta hydroxybutyrate on a low carb diet seem to be really powerful. And if that is the case for people that have high circulating CRP and IL-6 as a result of obesity, like that might be why I take my father-in-law, for example, is like 310 pounds. He went on keto. He's like, I found other ways to lose weight, but this is the only thing that's mitigating my pain. And that happens a lot.
I think you might be right with that, because honestly, like I just switched my diet back to strict carnivore just for like, I just said I'm going to do it for a week, because I've been on this diet, like we've talked about it, basically like meat and fruit. And I do tend to eat like a lot of fruit, but I don't think it's like the fruit that's doing the damage. But I think that when I just eat meat, I go right into ketosis in like 2, 3 days. And then all of a sudden my body feels better. That's just anecdotal. That's just like what I've been doing. But now it's Wednesday now, so I'm 3 days into my just red meat and water diet, and I feel fantastic. And I was
Totally.
feeling really crappy last week. So it's like, it's very anecdotal, but I think that there is some truth there to that. Yeah.
No, for sure, man.
Let's talk a little bit about, you were just talking, I think that your mental health is just as important as your physical health. And we talked a little bit about like psilocybin and like mushrooms and things like that. And I know you wanted to like talk about that a little bit. Is this something that you've been playing around with, or at least researching?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely been researching. I've, dabbled around with some microdosing here and there because I'm always interested in, anytime the research, anytime you start to see the like mental health and medical community starting to look at this stuff, it's very intriguing, right? And the fact that like minds are becoming more open to this makes me think, okay, well, there's something here, right? There's something there. And I do know quite a bit about plasticity, and well, I shouldn't say quite a bit compared to like people that really know their stuff. Like I'm nothing, but I know enough about
Sure.
neuroplasticity and how important that is, and this idea of being able to sort of change your brain a little bit. As someone that has suffered from anxiety, depression for such a long time, for like 3 years, I was pretty severely addicted to benzos, like back in,
Oh, wow. Really?
2008. It was just,
That's a
I got
rough
hooked
one to
on
get
them.
off
Right.
of too.
It's a
That's
tough one to
tough.
get off of because
Yeah.
you have to taper, otherwise you have seizures, and it's just like, so and that was back when I was in like the corporate world. It was like, and didn't realize I had a problem until like I had already kicked it, right? I'm like, holy crap, I was taking like a few milligrams a day. Like this is pretty crazy, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And I've always kind of suffered with anxiety, always kind of suffered with depression, but more so anxiety. And like, I know that I never want to throw my family under the bus. I just know it was a result of just not the best situation growing up. I was kind of on my own a lot after the time I was about 13. And it was just like, so I think I just had a lot of things thrown at me, and I'm not playing victim here. It's just reality.
Yeah, absolutely. We
So the
all have
coping,
trauma, like
yeah,
every,
you develop
I,
coping mechanisms.
the more people I meet, the more I realize everybody's got something, and
Yeah,
that's why
it's kind of funny
that's why I
because
think these things are great.
you mentioned like my ability to convey information. I think like I developed the ability to communicate and articulate as somewhat of a coping mechanism, because from a young age I had to, being so much on my own, and like I had to really just, I had to get people to listen to me, because I was always the youngest guy like doing something like, and I just learned to effectively communicate. And so it's interesting. So with that, I've learned, I was like, I'm always like in these bubbles, and social media can be a really dark place. Like it can be really dark and really depressing. The amount of inbound, positive and negative, is too much. It's too
Yeah.
much, right? It's like we're not designed to be getting this much validation. We're also not designed to be getting this much like
Negativity.
negativity. Like it's coming at warp speed. So I see a lot of people crumble with it. So for me, experimenting beginning stages with even high concentrations of like ginseng as a powerful adaptogen started. Then I kind of went into lion's mane and reishi, and then I've dabbled with psilocybin and things like that with tremendous results as
Yeah.
far as being able to change my state. And one of the things that I've learned is that like with any of these things, okay, it doesn't matter whether it's psilocybin or even like high concentration of lion's mane, like trying to give for similar effects, which I don't know if you call them similar, but the point is the same. You need to be able to be in the right state. Otherwise, it's a
Yeah.
problem. Like
I,
everyone,
I personally feel that mushrooms, like a good place for them, like for psilocybin mushrooms in the fitness world, would be when people are like rehabbing and different things. Because what a lot of people don't know is once you increase the serotonin in your brain, even just a little bit with like a microdose,
Mhm.
you it really has a profound effect on your pain, throughout the day. Like if you have higher serotonin levels, your pain levels will be a lot lower. So I notice that when I do mushrooms, whether I do a little dose or a lot, and I've experimented a lot with them up to 20 grams, which is a
Mhm.
ton of mushrooms. And that was like a trip to the moon. And I don't really advise anybody do that. I like to experiment with things. So I've tried mushrooms like every dose you can probably imagine. But any dose that I try, I always notice that the pain goes away. And that's one thing that I've been really sort of like looking into, because if these things can be used to help people deal with not just mental pain, but physical pain, I think that would be amazing. And then also just what I've gotten out of it, like at times when my mother passed away, for example, using like mushrooms made me be okay with that.
Yeah.
Using mushrooms has helped me get over a lot of different things. So I think that they're very, very useful in both the micro and the macro. I just say that to people should be very careful, like stepping into it. Like I always recommend, microdosing a couple times first if you're going to do what they call like the heroic dose. But the nice thing is that there's no LD50 on them. Nobody's ever died from just ingesting mushrooms. Now that doesn't mean that you can't do something stupid and mix it with a bunch of other things and blah blah. It's like not that, but I feel like there is a good, safe way forward with these things, and that the more that medicine gets on board with it, the safer and better it's going to be for people to use.
Yeah, and people that are trepidatious, like there's places I know in California and where you can go and you can sit with a therapist and do psilocybin. You can
Yeah,
do it in a controlled setting. So
right
we're
here
not
in
talking.
I think it's like Santa Clara, they've become
Yeah.
decriminalized, and in
Yeah.
Sacramento they're actually trying to decriminalize them now, and that would be really great if we can just get a couple of these areas to decriminalize them and have people utilize them, and we'll see what profound effects they can have on people. I've seen amazing things with just like helping people that were suicidal sort of like pull themselves out of it, and if we can use them for
Yes.
that, that's a miracle.
Yeah, totally, man. And just to give, pragmatic advice for people that are even like looking into this or even just looking at the research. Like the research is confusing because a lot of times you're looking at neurobiology and you're looking at it, so it's hard to read research. So I mean, I will give it that it's difficult. Fortunately, I've got some people in my circle that really can translate some of that stuff that's really complex. But even it's not comparative to a certain degree, but if people are wanting to try things that are, um, not of as much controversy,
Yeah.
there's something called, I don't know if you've ever messed around with something called shilajit. It's a,
No.
it's a resin that comes from Himalayan rocks, and it's god awful tasting. Like it's terrible. It's like a resin though.
Sure.
It's SCHILJIT or something like that. Um, and that has a very powerful like adaptogenic components, but also potential like neuroplasticity effects. And I've messed around with that, and I wouldn't say it's comparable, but it's a different sort of sensation. Like it's
Ha-
one of those things where if I take that and go for a run, if I take a decent amount of that and go for like a run, from a performance side of things, I feel like I could run forever. Pain is alleviated tremendously. State of mind is tremendous. But what I've noticed with it is this like plasticity effect and sort of what I would consider, I
Interesting.
can't document this, but what I would almost consider long-term potentiation, where I feel like the results of it actually stuck. So it's like, so this is something, I mean, you can literally get on Amazon. It's
Yeah.
just, and it's kind of expensive, but it's a cool, and I would recommend people do it. Like, take something like this if you're going to go out on a run or you're going to go out on a hike, and you know you're not going to have external stimulus, because one of the things that I've learned with anything that's mood altering, like, and again, this goes for no matter what category it is, like even if it's just high dose of just something that's perfectly like legal, like we're
Yeah.
talking again, lion's mane, like you can do a copious amount of lion's mane and have a weird effect. Um, I usually try to be alone because like craziness of the family and things like that, I find that I will reinforce whatever state I'm in. So like if
Yes.
I am in a multitasking sort of manic mode because I'm working and I've got kids and I'm doing this, if I were to take something then, whether it's Shilajit, lion's mane, or even microdosing, it's like reinforcing that behavior.
Yeah, and
And then
that
I
set
know,
and setting is probably the most important thing with psychedelics or adaptogens is like be in the right place at the right time around the right people or nobody. And you know, like they say the best place to do psychedelics is in a dark room by yourself where you can't get hurt, which is probably true. But then, you know, outside of that, you know, like I think that when people do these things and take decent amounts, they need to, you know, be in the right environment, maybe just listening to music, but like no technology, like not on your phone. Like, doesn't make sense to take mushrooms and then be on your phone. You're like, you really want to dig deep into that healing that it's giving you. Have you ever tried kratom for your anxiety by any chance, like
you've
Mind Bullet? Did I ever give you some of
just
that?
yours. Yes, you have.
I
And
think
I,
that's
it's
very effective for a lot of people as well. It doesn't work for everybody, but it's another way to sort of battle through anxiety, just using it once in a while.
I got a cool, I mean, the couple times that I've taken it, I wasn't in an anxious mood, so I can't speak to if it would affect me there. But I found it almost to be like, in a good way, almost like truth serum. It was
Yeah.
like, I was like, it was like, the first time I actually took it was before podcasting with Mark. And like, I walked out of that being like,
Oh,
wow, that
you took
felt,
the potion, right? The
yeah,
liquid? Yeah, those
yeah.
things are pretty strong. I
I
have
was like
some
that.
capsules. I'll send you some capsules. I think you'll dig
Okay,
it.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, man. I guess I felt, I walked out of that being like, wow, I feel like I just like poured my heart out in a really cool way with things that I like never would have like really talked about. And I don't mean like unleash skeletons in my closet type truth serum, but I mean it was like I it's just like this conversation that
Start
was able
telling
to
us where the bodies are hidden.
yeah, it was like it was really interesting. So then I, I've taken it a couple other times. What I noticed with kratom is definitely like I've got, L4, L5, L5S1 ruptured discs that bother me quite a bit. I noticed quite a bit of pain relief from that. Which was is
Yeah, that's what I mainly use it for. I just message him that hey, we're all good. We don't. I mean, we're gonna ask him one more question or something. Yeah, it's great because I'm like a little bit nervous because I didn't want it to be like confrontational. So like it was
Yeah.
cool that he was just so nice. It's
He
like,
calmed you down a little bit, to be truthful, because you were a little nervous in the
yeah, I was
beginning.
like, I don't want to dig into this guy on, like.
And he said, I mean, he said what I've been telling you since the beginning, dude. Your opinion matters to these
That's good.
people. Your opinion matters to the people.
Are you recording?
Yeah, you're on.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you're willing to accept that yet.
Yeah.
Your opinion matters, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You know, like to hear Thomas DeLauer, who has 3 million followers, say, well, when you left me a message, I immediately responded to it. To me, that's really cool. And it's really interesting because like the last thing I want to do is ever to hurt one of my friends' businesses or what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want them to be part of like what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to like educate and really help people. And I know that he's, that's what his goal is. So when I see something that's like maybe a little bit off, I hit him up. But now that I get his context, I think like a post like that wouldn't bother me anymore because I get okay, he probably explained it all on YouTube. Because when he did send me the full YouTube video, in the full YouTube video, there was context that said like, you've never tried a diet before, you've never tried an intervention before, try this. This could be very effective, right?
Right. And just to be the most forwardly fair to him, that wasn't his channel. He didn't produce that video.
Yeah, he didn't produce
He didn't put the knee pain overlay on it, right? And B, when you look at his body of work, he doesn't have a history. I think anyone that endeavors to be a little bit of a creator, you're going, not everything's going to come out.
And he's done
perfect.
videos that debunk his own videos of old, which is interesting. Like where
Yeah,
he's
right.
debunking himself from like, hey, I said this 5 years ago, but now I think this because of this new information. So he's always been somebody that's been like constantly like changing his mind as far as I've seen. And those are the best people to follow.
Evolving.
You don't want to follow people that are just constantly doing the same thing forever. The only exception I've seen that's been fantastic has been like Sean Baker, who's been like kind of doing the same thing forever and kind of getting really good results. And that's why I believe so much in the carnivore diet. It's not that it's anything special, but by reducing a lot of these other things, like for example, what Thomas was saying, I get in ketosis really quick when I just do the like red meat, and the ketones could be something that's helping the inflammation and helping the pain. I'm not really sure. At that same note, thinking that way, now I'm thinking like, would the exogenous ketones, like if ketones help to kill pain, I need to look into this more, but would taking like exogenous ketones, which I thought were useless because like all they do is like get you into ketosis on like a P test.
Well, they're useless for losing weight. It depends on what you're using them for.
Exactly. And maybe they're useful in pain
health,
in pain management
clarity,
along with
acuity.
a ketogenic diet. So like, I don't know. We'll have to see. Maybe I'll push the ketones a little bit on this time. Stuff like that. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, Thomas DeLauer, it was awesome to be able to talk to somebody that has such a big following and just, have a conversation with him. Wish it was like a little bit longer because we probably talk forever about it.
I'll take the hit on that. I've never launched a Zoom meeting before. I didn't know that they time them out unless you're in like a pro account. So Thomas, I'm so sorry. And I'm glad you're having a good time in Carmel, and we gave you 15 minutes quicker to get back to your family.
Yeah, I would say you're off the team, but if you're off the team, then I don't have a podcast.
No, you love me. You love me.
So I can't. You're on the team, Russell.
You're right.
But anyway, that was a great conversation had with him. We'll have a lot more really cool guests like this coming up. When I first started this podcast, I sort of just wanted it to be, it was sort of just a hangout. Like we would just hang out and talk. We're in the gym all the time, like whatever. But it seems to be progressing in a way and getting all, we were on more plates, more dates yesterday. Derek gave us some love, and I want to give some love back to him. So if you guys want to use Derek's hormone replacement clinic, which is probably the best in the world, it's called Merrick Health. You can go to merrickhealth.com. You can go to my Instagram at BigStrongFast, click the link in the bio, and go right to Merrick Health and use my code BOAR and get 10% off of everything over at Merrick Health. Also on the podcast, we discussed Mind Bullet. Whoa, I knocked over Smelly. And you can go to mindbullet.com/Chris Bell and order Mind Bullet, which can help you with just a lot of things, mental clarity, physical pain. It does a lot of things. It's awesome. So anyway, that's it for today, and I will see you guys later.
Bye.